Let me first begin by saying it's just such a blessing and a delight to be in conversation with each and every one of you. And anytime I get a chance to spend time with my dear brother, Chris, you know, he's one of the great gems that anybody who gets a chance to know him can testify to. And he always uplifts my spirit. And even in down moments, I have stronger bounce back when I'm reading him, when I'm in conversation with him, talking on the phone and so forth. And so when he calls, I come running with a smile. And so even under these pandemic conditions, even under these very, very difficult circumstances, you have certain sources of joy and certain sources of enablement. And Brother Chris is one. And I'm sure you all will be able to testify to that once you know him well. I know my dear sister, Professor Thiessen Riley, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Isn't that true? We got similar testimony. So that and for part of it has to do with the fact that he's such an exemplary lover of wisdom, a lover of justice, a lover of the good, a lover of beauty. And that is what I think is very important. And that's in part what this class is about. Because when you talk about freedom and autonomy, you're really talking about the courage to think critically for yourself. The courage to love, not asking anybody's permission as to who you love, when that flows from the depths of your soul. And the courage to hope. And the courage of hope. And the courage of hope is trying to find that zone where you're killing illusions on the one hand, but you're keeping hope alive on the other. And that's a very, very difficult thing. That's a Chekhov-like tightrope to walk, because education is very much a matter of learning how to die in order to learn how to live, to call into question certain assumptions that you have. And when you let those assumptions go, that's a form of death in order to be reborn intellectually, spiritually, psychically, and so forth. So you're giving up certain illusions, but at the same time, you're trying to hold on to a hope. And hope is as much a verb as a virtue in that sense. You're trying to keep moving to preserve your integrity. So when you talk about race, you're simply talking about one particular evil that generates undeserved hurt and unwarranted pain. It could be this variety of different kinds of evils in the world. Any ideology that loses sight of the humanity of people generates that kind of undeserved hurt and harm. And so when you're talking about a race in history of the United States, from slavery and Jim Crow and lynching on up to our present moment, there has been unprecedented progress for some. Persons like myself, I'm only 2 generations from slavery. That's how old I am. We won't go into how old I am. And so, so here I am at Harvard. Oh, that's magnificent progress. But at the same time, you see, you have to be able to keep track, not just of the progress, but also of the suffering alongside it, so that those who have been unable to seize the opportunity and experience the progress, their experience is just as important as that of someone like myself. That's why I never measure the success of how the Black community is doing by looking at those who have overwhelming opportunities, those who are successful, the celebrities and so forth and so on. No, I look at it in terms of the least of these. And I'm a Christian, so the biblical imperative to look at the world through the lens of those who suffer, look at the world through the lens of those friends who know called the wretched of the earth. They are the real source of measurement here. And when you look at the mass incarceration regime, when you look at the shattered families and communities, when you look at the decrepit school systems, when you look at the massive underemployment and unemployment, when you look at the massive, the inability of so many Black, brown, red, whatever color in the United States, not that you have health care, decent housing, that ironically has intensified alongside the progress.
It has
intensified. So you have to be able to keep both ideas in your mind at the same time. They are opposing ideas. And then when you look at it spiritually, and I always believe in the centrality of morality, which is issues of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, courage, and the primacy of spirituality. And by spirituality, all I mean in part is that last line of Percy Shelley's great essay in defense of poets. He said, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. You all remember that wonderful line. And he's not talking about versifiers. He's talking about all human beings who through empathy and imagination look at the ugliness of the world and conceive of another world, a better world, authorize an alternative reality in the world in which we live. So that's true for the great religions. The great religions look at the world and see suffering and misery, and they authorize an alternative reality. And myself as a Christian, we talk about the kingdom of God. The love in the face of a world overwhelmed by hatred and cruelty and envy and resentment and contempt and so forth. Judaism, of course, that great moral revolution in the species in many ways in terms of Hebrew scripture. To be human is, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with that God. Justice, justice thou shalt pursue. A conception of a different world in the midst of, in their case, slavery in Egypt. And Muslims the same way. Muhammad, I'm going to create Medina. We're going to have Jews, we're going to have Muslims all living together. It's a different world than the world in which we find ourselves. And if you're secular and agnostic and atheistic, it's a different world in terms of something more egalitarian, something more democratic, something more something more sweeter, something more gentler, and so forth and so on. So that the poets, in this sense, is much broader than just those who write verses. And Shelley understood that. Mm-hmm. So that morality, spirituality at the center. The answer to your question, though, brother, here we are in 2020, had a black president. Well, very well, the good chance we'll have a black vice president. Unprecedented progress. Black professors here at Harvard, black folk doing well in the upper middle classes, but then the masses of black folk still poor and working class, locked in, wages stagnating, you see, spiritually not receiving the kind of love that they ought in their own families and communities and the largest societies. The police are just one slice of this, you see. We never forget Dostoevsky's definition of hell in Brothers Karamazov. He says, hell is suffering from the incapacity to love. Think of yourself so worthless, not worthy of love, you see. And this is not something that, black folk have a monopoly on. It's a human thing. Hamlet, the greatest figure in all of modern European literature, suffers from the incapacity to love. But all those soliloquies, you see how brilliant he is. You see his intellect manifest. And so that we can always connect the spiritual with the social and always connect the personal with the political and the economic with the existential. So when I look at progress, I'm not solely looking at the material condition. I'm also looking at the state of their souls, forms of self-respect and self-regard and self-esteem. We know many people who do well financially who still hate themselves. And they're still living in a kind of psychic hell, even though they have material. We know people who are very poor, who are spiritually rich, who are culturally rich. They just broke as the 10 Commandments financially. See? So that's, for me, part of the framework. That's what I was trying to do, in race matters and democracy matters and so forth. And of course, you picked this up, Brother Chris, many decades ago in terms of the work that you do and the ways in which you and I and our callings so profoundly overlap. That makes us more than friends. It makes us brothers. It makes us fellow questers for wisdom and fellow questers for justice and for truth and goodness and beauty.
I hadn't thought of this, but I was thinking of actually the Shakespeare play Othello and how that you can be respected and venerated, and yet you also have another side to you, the Moor of Venice, that you're always traversing two worlds that can lead in a way to self-loathing and the machinations of a sociopath or psychopath like Iago. And so, Shakespeare penetrated the human psyche in ways that we're still coming to terms with.
No, we've got a long way to go to catch up with Shakespeare. But all of the great artists, one could argue, we've got so far to catch up. That's why the artists are really the vanguard of the species. And I would even argue that in many ways, the musicians are the vanguard of the artists. As great as Shakespeare is, Beethoven, as great as Shakespeare is, John Coltrane, as great as Shakespeare is, Aretha Franklin. Ooh, they do something that even Shakespeare can't do. You know what I mean? And I'd add Stephen Sondheim and some of my other favorites in that regard. But the crucial thing is that what Shakespeare it does and what the great artists do, I think Rembrandt does it on the canvas as well, that they pierce all of the various armors that we have that rationalize our egoism and our narcissism and our hedonism. They pierce it in such a way that they radically unsettle us. And they remind us at the deepest level of our humanity. The fact that we are disappearing creatures and vanishing organisms who come into the world with fears and insecurities and anxieties. And one day our bodies will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. And there's no escape. Kafka called it the death sentence in space and time. There's no escape from space and time other than the grave in one form or the other. And you can come up with what happens thereafter. That's a different discourse. But once you reach that deep human level, then you begin to see, lo and behold, me and Brother Chris and each and every one of us, we share a whole lot of different things in common. Even as, of course, we have a variety of differences and diversities and so forth in light of that common humanity, as it were.
Brother West, I'm going to turn over some questions to some of my students from my class, if that's okay with you. Megan Forms has a question for you. Megan, where are you?
Where is Sister Megan?
Where are you? You there?
Yeah, right here.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know where you are, but go ahead. We hear you. That's all that matters.
Yeah, let me find it.
I see you.
I
see you.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were asking about the real deal versus fake idols.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw your conversation on YouTube that you posted, Dr. Phillips, and I remember something.
My conversation with Dr. West.
Yeah, Dr. West.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think it was like from 2018. You said like try to look for the real deal of people to look up to and not just people that show up and are fake idols. I was wondering like how you do that specifically, like what you consider like a fake idol compared to like a real person. Does that make sense?
Oh, it is. That's a profound question. I'm telling you. It goes all the way back to the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. There is no God but Yahweh. That idolatry is the benchmark of spiritual immaturity and moral underdevelopment. How do we distinguish between the idols of the world and the real things? Now, again, we got secular brothers and sisters, love, joy. What's the difference between enduring joy and superficial pleasure? That's the difference between lust and love, right? It's the difference between titillation and stimulation and deeply caring and deeply nurturing. It's the difference between the sparkle in your mama's eye when you satisfy her because she sacrificed for you and you know that you are doing something to bring some joy to her. That's different than whatever pleasure you might get on Friday night. Qualitatively different. And I'm not a Puritan. I'm not saying don't have no pleasure at all. I'm not going that far.
Well, you're a great dancer, by the way.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear what our categories are. So the question becomes, well, what is the real thing? And here, of course, is very difficult because we're fallible human beings. We all have fallible judgments. We could be wrong of what we think is the real thing and what is not the real thing. I just actually did a song with a funk master named Bootsy Collins, who used to play for Funkadelics in the Parliament and played when he was 18 years old for James Brown. It wrote a song called Stars, and there's a line in that song that says, "Stars have no names, they just shine. They have no names, they just shine." Now, of course, that's a critique of the superficial culture of spectacle and consumption. Everybody wants a name. Everybody wants fame. Everybody got their brand. So their brand is widely known. No, shine means what? People want to see who you are at the deepest level, how much love you really got inside of you. How much courage do you really have inside of you? How much integrity do you really have inside of you? That's what shines. Now, in my own Christian tradition, we just talk about it in terms of, by your fruits you shall know them. By your fruits you shall know them. The quality of your service to others. And that's always measured by one, vulnerability. You never find out who you really are. No one can find out who you really are until you're vulnerable. And again, it takes us back to Dostoevsky and Shakespeare again. A benchmark of the inability to love is he or she who has no cultivated faculty of vulnerability. Because if you're never vulnerable, you're never going to receive love. It's just going to be manipulation, domination. Vincibility, that you're vincible. So that it opens into an intimacy. And by intimacy, what I really mean is a certain kind of acknowledgement of getting behind any mask that you wear to find out who you are behind the mask. You see? So that the difference between a fake, a phony, and a fraud versus a person who is trying to be the real thing, but always falling on one's face, because again, we always recognize our fallibility. All of us fail. You know, Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail better. Try again, fail better. We're all going to end up failures in some sense because no one of us are pure. No one of us are in any way free of some shortcoming and so on. But that quest for the real beyond idols is so fundamental. It creates what the great Alfred North Whitehead called noble discontent. Noble discontent. This is in his great classic, Adventures of Ideas. A critical discontent. Because when we are in the process of maturing, we're forever acknowledging how we fall short, what our inadequacies are, what our faults are, what our foibles are, what our vulnerabilities are. And of course, when you're able to make that deep connection, the real connection in one's vulnerability, in one's vincibility, you on the way some deep love in the form of friendship or romance or whatever. Because when you get that deep and you open yourself that authentically, you got some deep sharing that's going to take place. Very deep sharing take place.
I was brought up on Sly and the Family Stone. I'm thinking of the music. Yeah. I'm thinking about everybody is a star.
That's right. Ooh, that's a classic too.
It is. I was brought up on that.
Everybody can shine. Everybody. Now, you know, Sly Stone used to play the organ in my church every fifth Sunday.
What?
Yes, my brother. We knew him as Sylvester.
Oh,
he grew up in Vallejo. He would bring his sister Rose, who did all the singing on the record. He would bring Freddie. Fred still has the biggest black church in Vallejo to this very day.
That's incredible.
But Sly would show up with the Northern California Mass Choir in my church, Shiloh Baptist Church. And Lord, we'd have a good time. Isn't that something? I just did a song with Sly on his latest album called Destiny.
Oh my gosh.
We did one together. This is a footnote to you. I'm sorry to go on and on.
That's so cool.
But Sly he's one of the great, and this is a good point in terms of name and fame, because Sly Stone, Sam Cooke, Curtis Mayfield, three of the greatest artists of the 1960s and 70s. They never won a Grammy, but Milli Vanilli won 2.
Ooh.
Now, Milli
So,
Vanilli is about as flat as a pancake and about as deep as pre-sweetened Kool-Aid. They won 2 Grammys. You remember Milli Vanilli because they won.
yes.
They got caught lip singing. You remember?
Oh yeah.
You remember they got caught lip singing. And everybody said, "Hey, wait, it sounded so good," but all of a sudden the machine broke down and they couldn't sing. And everybody said, "What is going on?" Oh, I see.
What's going on?
Awards, obsession with prizes, obsession with titles, and then you get a great artist like Sly or Sam Cooke or Curtis Mayfield, no titles. Who cares? Who cares? That's the arbitrary choices of the world, the mainstream, the establishment. We want somebody who can play that piano and organ in such a way that they touch your soul. You listen to some Sly Stone tonight. Listen to some Curtis Mayfield tonight. Listen to some Sam Cooke sing "A Change Is Gonna Come Tonight." You say, ooh, I know what the real thing is.
Oh, that's so, I will listen to them all tonight. Okay, Brother West, we have another student, Megan Walton. Megan, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I just did.
Okay. So let's find you in this unit.
I didn't have a question really. I just thought it was really interesting that at the end of the PDF part that I read, like the very end, it had asked the question, do we have the intelligence, humor, imagination, courage, tolerance, love, respect, and will to meet the challenge of racism, patriarchy, economic inequality, homophobia, and ecological abuse? And I think that's just like a question that's still very prevalent today, even though that was written like 26 years before now. And it's like something we all still ask ourselves every day.
No, I hear you, my dear sister. I ask it every day too, and I go up and down and round because, you know, we just wonder, as a species, do we have what it takes to be able to preserve the best inside of us and in our cultures, or will there be this overwhelming triumph of hatred and greed and envy and resentment and domination? Every generation raises that question. Every generation. What is unique in this generation is, given the technological powers and prowess that we have the capacity to either blow up the whole globe with nuclear weapons. The ecological catastrophe that is already at work could lead toward the extinction of the species. Politically, we're seeing escalating neo-fascisms around the world, authoritarian regimes around the world. You could look to Hungary, you could look in Brazil, you can look in the United States, you can look in parts of Africa. I mean, all around the world, you're seeing ordinary people more and more finding themselves in situations in which their leaders have massive disregard of law, cold-hearted, mean-spirited, and most importantly, and this is always the benchmark of the lack of democracy, no accountability. They can say what they want to do what they want to do, and get away with it. See, arbitrary use of power. And democracy is all about curtailing the arbitrary use of power. Some kind of accountability, some kind of answerability, some kind of responsibility of everybody, including the elites who have a disproportionate amount of wealth and power and status and so forth. So that we live in very, very grim times, but I would argue that it's always been grim if we look close enough. It's always been grim. Socrates was put to death with the hemlock. It was grim. The wars had just taken place. Persian Empire, the Peloponnesian Wars, Jesus on the cross. Esther almost put to death. We go on and on and on and on. Each of our countries have various exemplars in this regard. If you're in the Philippines, you have your own tradition. Puerto Rico has its own tradition. Colombia has their own tradition of folk who were forces for good. And so many of them are misunderstood, misconstrued, if not targeted with character assassination, many literal assassination. And so that last question that I raised was a question that I think we must perennially come back to and wrestle with. And the answer has to do with the kind of lives that we lead. The answer is not a proposition. The answer is not abstract. The answer is the concrete lives we lead. So that when people come to your funeral, what will they say? They're not going to talk about how much money you made. They're not going to talk about how big your house was. They're not going to talk about your status. They're going to talk about who you loved, who you sacrificed for, who you tried to enable, and what achievements you had in regard to how they were used as gifts to the world. Those are the fundamental queries, you see. And that's an answer to those questions in terms of the lives that we lead. And none of us are messiahs or saviors or anything. We're just trying to do what we can. When I was growing up in church, we were always told, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. And that heaven has to do with love, justice, joy, a grin, a touch, what kind of service you're rendering, how can you be of aid and help, and so forth. I know that's a long answer to that question, but I mean, I appreciate her reading that long, that sentence. I hadn't actually heard that sentence in a long time.
Well, you know, it speaks to the heart of our course on human freedom and autonomy. Just this notion of all the people that we are reading about, from Antigone to Socrates to Dr. King to you and Hannah Arendt. These are people who lived by what a higher law. And there's this quote I wanted to get from Thurgood Marshall, who believed that there's something higher than the Constitution. That is simply the people. And what he means is what Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration, that just governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed. And because of this, you have not only the right, but also responsibility to the government of this country to live by a higher law. If the ukases of the Trumps and the King Creons conflict with your ideals.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the idols versus the ideals that we were talking about before, you see. But, you know, there's a wonderful line in Reinhold Niebuhr's great text, Moral Man and the Moral Society of 1932, where he says, any justice that is only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. Justice must be rescued by something deeper than justice. And what is deeper than justice? Love. What is deeper than justice? Mercy. The Merchant of Venice, and the great reflection on mercy being deeper than justice. Justice different than revenge, but something deeper than justice. Mercy. Something deeper than justice in the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem. Love. What our Jewish brothers and sisters call hesed. That loving kindness to the widow, the stranger, the fatherless, the motherless, the poor, the subjugated, the dominated, the oppressed. That's the covenant that Yahweh makes with the Israelites, you see, in the Hebrew scripture, you see. And so this issue of this higher law that Thurgood Marshall is talking about, you see, is crucial. And of course, it takes us back in some ways to the fundamental question of so much of Western civilization, which is, why is it that Socrates never cries and Jesus never laughs? And this was a question that Thomas More was wrestling with in the Tower of London right before he was executed. You read his dialogues on tribulation. Socrates, we love, we embrace. Hard to find someone who doesn't exemplify intellectual integrity. But Socrates has never shown shedding a tear, and anybody who's never shed a tear has never been in love with somebody. And when you come to the funeral of your mother and your father, your best friend, you're going to shed a tear. Because Socrates' ideal was self-mastery and self-control. But there's nothing wrong with being out of control when the tears are flowing. So you got to out-Socrates Socrates, which is to say you have to criticize Socrates in the spirit of Socratic criticism. You say, Socrates, were you ever married, brother? He says, yes, I was. I married to Xanthippe, and when I was on the deathbed, she came in with tears, and I told my best friend, get her out of here, get her out of here. I can't take it, I can't take it. He said, hey, come on, Socrates, man. What's wrong with tears? That just shows your heart's not numb. Allow those tears to flow. What does Jesus do? He weeps. It's two of the most profound words in all of the Christian Bible. Jesus weeps. Why does Jesus weep? Because he loves Lazarus, because he loves Jerusalem, because he knows out of love he is going to be crucified when he makes his way to the temple and runs out those greedy money changers. And of course, you don't see that Jesus picture on the wall of most churches, though, do you? It's hard to find a church that has a picture of Jesus running out the money changers. But that's the reason why he was crucified. But when you love persons, you're going to cry. Socrates loves wisdom, but it's unclear. Am I being fair, you think, Brother Chris? Am I being fair? I know you the man on Socrates here now.
Well, no, I'm trying to think of what my yaya, my Greek grandmother was the first teacher of Greek culture and language in Tampa. They immigrated through Ellis Island in 1922.
Wow, my God, my God.
Well, the untold story is then she didn't like the U.S. and she went back. And my grandfather had to go get her.
Had to go get her.
She didn't like the U.S.
Lord. Well, I mean, but the Greeks, you got Aristophanes, you got Euripides, you got Aeschylus, and certainly you've got Sophocles.
She was
a lot of tears in all of those. Those are the artists. Those are the artists, you see.
Yes.
Whereas Socrates himself, as what Nietzsche was upset with. Nietzsche says, I'm looking for a dancing Socrates.
Yes.
I'm looking for an artistic Socrates. I'm looking for a Socrates who can do the moonwalk like Michael Jackson.
My
and
yaya
still have intellectual integrity, you see. And so when we're talking about the fusion of the Socratic legacies of Athens and the prophetic legacies of Jerusalem and the ways in which it generates conceptions of human freedom, radical freedom in love, radical love in freedom. Both of those traditions coming together in a very, very rich way. And I know those traditions have meant so much to me in terms of my own thinking.
Now, I'm going to turn this over now. Another student of mine, Jeremy Fletcher. Jeremy, you are on. Say hi to Brother West.
Yeah, so just after kind of looking over some of your work, I kind of had a question in regards to kind of what's recently going on with all the racial rioting and stuff. And how do you feel that the looting that originally happened with the Black Lives Matter protests, did that help or hinder the movement? I know for myself personally, it was really kind of eye-opening to see that people have been ignored for so long that they've come to that point.
No, I appreciate the question, though, brother. And I like that hat you got there too. That's looking sharp, man. That's looking very, very sharp, though, brother. But I mean, one is that when we talk about integrity, or what the great Jane Austen called constancy, we have to have a moral consistency. And it seems to me that one, the violation of any innocent person is wrong, no matter what color that person is, no matter what one's cause is, and so forth. There are certain fundamental values and virtues you hold on to, whether it's in the context of a rebellion, whether it's in the context of a normal situation. And so any kind of attack on innocent person is going to be wrong. Now, property also is wrong, but not exactly in the same way, I would argue. That I put much more value on human life than I do on property. Now, of course, the larger backdrop is you have to keep track of the institutional forms of looting that has gone on. When you look at what Wall Street did in 2008, with an embezzlement of billions and billions and billions of dollars, insider trading, market manipulation, fraudulent activity, predatory lending. How many Wall Street executives went to jail? Zero. Zero. Who was bailed out? Wall Street. Federal Reserve gave them how much? Trillions and trillions and trillions. That's a certain kind of institutional looting that can take place with no accountability. So then when you get poor people in rebellion, as you say, rightly so, you see, and they then, attack property, it's wrong, but it's within this larger context, it is to be contrasted, and we say both are wrong in their distinctive ways. But very little was said about the Wall Street looting, and of course that's been going on for a good while. That's been going on for a good while under both administrations, Democratic Party and Republican Party demonstrations. I got in a lot of trouble by being critical of my dear brother Barack Obama, because of course it was Barack Obama who bailed him out and kept the policy of giving them billions and billions of dollars. They call it the QEA, which was a particular kind of policy to make sure the Wall Street bankers remained stable. But how many fellow citizens lost their homes? Millions and millions. Were they bailed out? No, not at all. And the Federal Reserve has the ability to give money to community banks. They have the ability to give money to Wall Street banks. But they give money to Wall Street banks. That's a priority. That's a moral question. That's a spiritual question. And that was true for the Obama administration, true for the Bush administration. So in that sense, my dear brother, I was very, very inspired by all of the fellow citizens of all colors who hit the streets when they saw our dear brother George Floyd engaged, treated in that ugly way, the kind of public lynching in a certain sense, you see. It's a beautiful thing that people say they're not numb. They saw that and said, this is wrong. I'm going to do something about it. I'm hitting the streets. And the result was what? 2,000 cities, the largest protest in the history of the whole country. And it was vanilla, chocolate, all the different colors right there in the street, all the different genders, all the different sexual orientations, all the different religions, the non-religions, secular, and so forth. The beautiful thing to see. The question is, how do you translate it into something that deals with poverty and deals with the lack of housing, lack of health care, and what have you. Right now, it's ended up being more and more debate over monuments, and whether this name is on this building or whether George Washington ought to be here or there. And a lot of times, T.S. Eliot has this wonderful line in Burnt Norton, one of the great poems, and he was one of the great poets of the 20th century. He says, we moderns are distracted from distractions by distractions. So
Wow,
it's easy.
That's profound.
Isn't that powerful? So that so much of American culture are massive weapons of distraction that don't want us to get at the things that really matter, that need to be wrestled with, you see. And that's one of the roles of education. That's why you also blessed to have my dear brother Chris. He's one of the great educators of this era. And what is education about? It's trying to get you to shift your attention from superficial things to substantive things. And it's trying to get you to cultivate your critical thinking so that you think for yourself. You're not just an echo in an echo chamber. You have your own voice. Your voice is just like your fingerprint. Nobody has your fingerprint in the world, even your twin. If you have a twin, it's a little slightly different, your fingerprint. So it is with your voice, you see. And I think it's when you're talking about education, those three pillars. Cultivate the right kind of attention and the things that matter so you're not distracted. cultivate the right kind of critical thinking so you think for yourself. You're not imitating anybody. And then last but not least, you got to cultivate your soul. So you learn how to love. You don't want to pass through space and time not really knowing how to love, which means you have to learn how to receive. You have to learn how to give. You have to learn how to be vulnerable. You have to learn how to protect. You have to learn how to take off and soar like an eagle. You got to learn how to move real slow like a turtle sometimes. It's all in the practical judgment and the timing. Because when you learn how to give to others, you give relative to what their needs are. Sometimes you got turtle-like needs and you move slow. Other times you got real quick rabbit needs and you're moving fast with them. And vice versa, you see. And that's part of what wisdom, phronesis, practical wisdom is all about. Because the text that you are reading, Brother Chris, you're reading Sophocles, Socrates,
Euthyphro, Apology, about 10 of the talks of Dr. King.
Wow, that much of Martin, huh? That's
from your Radical King.
Oh, why? Oh, you're using that book. Oh, that's kind of it.
Of course.
That's kind of it. Yes, indeed.
In fact, I keep thinking that his just a couple months before he died, he talked to students in Philadelphia.
Yes, that's exactly right.
About what's your life's blueprint, and I keep thinking about that, and blueprint and footprint.
Yes.
And it's one of the most, and they're assigned to read it. They haven't read it yet.
Oh, that's dynamite. You are in for some wonderful joys here, deep joys.
But when you were their age, did you think about that? Your blueprint, your footprint?
Now, how old most of you brothers and sisters would be? Let me see. How old is Brother Grant? How old are you, my brother?
22.
You 22. Oh, you got a magnificent life waiting for you.
I sure hope so.
Absolutely. Sister Kelsey's how old?
Yo.
Man, do I have to say it?
Oh, Brother West, I want you. That's Kelsey Bennett. She's the director of the honors program.
Yes.
Oh, is that right?
That's right.
Yes.
Oh,
So
I
grateful.
thought you were a
Thank
student.
you. Sorry?
I thought you were a student.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
See,
Yes.
you see that?
I'll go with that. Yes, 22. All right, I'll
What
go
about
with
Brother
that.
Brian? All of you, man. Brother Brian Bird.
I also teach here. I'm 37.
Oh,
He's a puppy.
37. Oh, no, indeed. And Sister Alina.
I'm 49.
Oh, and then Sister Vaughn.
Me?
Oh, yeah.
I'm 19.
19. Oh, no, so we've got a variety.
We got a variety.
That's beautiful.
You're looking for
beautiful. Definitely. I think I got hit with that question when I was about, maybe 12 or 13 reading Kierkegaard. I was living way out in the chocolate side of town in the ghetto in Sacramento, California. We didn't really have access to the main library. We had a little bookmobile that would go out. So when I was playing baseball and basketball and things, I would steal away and go to that bookmobile. And I was reading biographies of Albert Einstein and others. But I came across Kierkegaard's diary. And I read that thing. I said, oh my God, it's like reading Dostoevsky or Nietzsche. It just hits you, it makes you shake. A certain kind of existential vertigo, everything is dizzy. It's, oh, wow, this is something else. I've got to come to terms with this. And I've been wrestling ever since. And I don't really believe there's any just absolute answers, because there's certain things that just are on the limits of, what we can think. Why is there something rather than nothing? It's time to get poetic at that point. You don't, even the physicists don't really know, Why do 1-year-old children, why do 1-year-old children die from disease or die from hurricane or die from tornadoes? Why does anybody die from some natural disorder? There's no theory that makes sense. You see, that's what the absurd is about. The absurd, those big holes in our meaning in light of suffering we can never account for. And the absurd that Beckett talks about. You seem to be overwhelmed by meaninglessness. And you can't give you can't render any, it doesn't make sense to you. And all of us have to be humble and vulnerable to that. So even as a Christian, I recognize that it's just a mystery that I can never fully grasp. And therefore, you just have to still keep loving, keep laughing, keep living, keep thinking, keep connecting, and keep communing. But that's the way it is. That's who we are as human beings, you see. Definitely. So we're forever wrestling with these endless questions. And you try to be conversant with some of the great minds to try to make sense of them. But in the end, we don't really have a lot. Let me show you a picture. This is my brother right here. You all see that picture right there? Anton Chekhov. Nobody like him. Nobody like him. The greatest literary artist of the last 150 years. Coughing up blood at 24, dies at 44, right before the greatest plays that we know, Uncle Vanya and the Three Sisters and the Seagull and the last play, The Cherry Orchard. You read a short story like The Student. I would have all students read Chekhov's favorite short story, wrote in 1894. 34 years old, called The Student. It's only 2 pages. So it's not like you reading Anna Karenina or nothing. Not like War and Peace or something like that. 2 pages. It can change your life. Change your life. That's Chekhov. And he comes after Tolstoy. He comes after Turgenev. He comes after Dostoevsky, the great Russian writers, and then moves into the 20th century, you see. And of course, the play Three Sisters is the greatest play in some ways, in the West at least, in the history of European literature since probably Shakespeare's Hamlet. And Beckett builds on Chekhov and Waiting for Godot. You all will be reading Waiting for Godot at some point in your lives as well. But they're wrestling with these questions of the absurd, the meaninglessness, and the hopelessness. And how do you try to get some hope? How do you hold on to hope even as you're killing illusions that I mentioned before? That tightrope. That's the Chekhovian space in that way, you see. I know I'm going on too long.
No, that's so beautiful.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yes. So thank you. So Autumn Moya is another one of my students, and she has a question for you.
I'm so sorry I can't see the others, though.
I've got you on the spotlight. Let me put you off the spotlight, and then I can, hopefully you can see some more. Let's see how this works.
Oh, that's nice.
Here we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Where's Autumn? There you are. There you are.
Hello.
Okay.
Hi. So I have a question about your Race Matters. In your first chapter, the last sentence, it really resonated with me. I'll read it for everyone. It says, the politics of conversion shuns the limelight, a limelight that solicits status seekers and integrates egomaniacs. Instead, it stays on the ground among the toiling everyday people, ushering forth humble freedom fighters, both followers and leaders, who have the audacity to take the nihilistic threat, but the neck and turn back its deadly assaults. Sorry. So I don't know, that really resonated with me, especially with the, political climate today. And I just kind of wanted to ask you if you still believe that this statement is true, because I personally definitely think it's true, but I just kind of wanted to see what you still said on that.
I appreciate you choosing that statement, reading that statement, and highlighting that statement, because it is something that I try to inculcate in my life. Yeah. So it's true not in the propositional sense, but it's true in an existential sense. It's the truth that one's willing to live for. It's the truth one's willing to die for. Because what it says is that at the highest level of who we are as human beings, it is about the Greeks call kenosis, Kenosis, kenosis. And what is kenosis? The emptying of oneself, the giving of oneself, the donating of oneself, the sacrificing of oneself. And when I talked about the genius of Hebrew scripture, which is this conception of Hesed spreading to stranger and orphan and widow, you see, it means that to be great is to be of great service to others. Yeah, so not necessarily Alexander the Great. No, we can love Alexander, but he's not the best example. No, Genghis Khan, like, absolutely not. All of these conquerors, they are the great. Napoleon the Great. Well, not really. He had a marvelous army and he was clever, but he wasn't great in the way we talking about. Kenosis. Kenosis has to do with what is the scope and breadth of your compassion, of your willingness to spread a connection, an empathy, a sympathy, an aid and assistance to others, you see. Not the scope of your domination, the scope of your conquest. Alexander's the greatest because he had the greatest empire of his day. I'm not impressed. You say, well, what criteria are you using? I'm using a different criteria than what most people use. Was Jesus great? Yes, he is up on the cross, 33 years old. The people who followed him had nothing to do with him. Even Peter himself said, I didn't know him 3 times. How is Christ great? How is Jesus great? Looks like just another one of those naive dreamers that got crushed by the empire. Through a certain lens, that's true. So how do we define greatness? Martin Luther King Jr., great. Martin Luther King Jr., when he died, he only had a few $100s. He had no insurance for his kids. Harry Belafonte had to pay his insurance. Didn't have money to pay his rent. But he won a Nobel Prize. He got $56,000, yes, and he gave every penny of it to the movement. And Coretta said, are you losing your mind? We need some cash, Martin. No, honey. Every penny we have, we giving. Now, I think he went too far because I believe in family responsibilities myself. But that's who he was. He's just giving everything. That is, in fact, a benchmark of greatness. And every great person, of course, has their own faults and foibles in that regard. I mean, folk used to say, a saint ain't nothing but a sinner who looks at the world through the lens of the heart. Because every saint got a funky past. Just like every sinner can have a better future.
So beautiful.
In time, the flow of time, change, possibility, always available in that way. But getting our conceptions of greatness in place in such a way that we understand when somebody is great, they don't have to be on stage, they don't have to be part of the spectacle, they don't have to be on television, they don't have to have their own TV show, and all of this kind of Oprahization of the world. Everybody look the world through the eyes of Oprah. Oh, Lord, who's going to get on her book list? Who's going to get on her show? Who is she going to talk about in her dialogue? You say, oh, spare me, Sister Oprah. I'm looking for greatness. Now, I don't know how many of y'all saw the speech last night. Anybody see the speech of Brother Biden? You all saw Brother Biden?
Yeah.
You remember who he mentions in the first sentence? Ella Baker.
You talked about that.
Yeah, you know, who is Ella Baker? Born 1903, died 1986. Was the major freedom fighter in the civil rights movement, even in some ways more than Martin Luther King Jr., because she was 23 years older, 26 years older than him. He had to look to her for leadership. Who was this Ella Baker who in the 1980s, at 81 years old, she's still fighting for freedom and talking about the light. That was a quote. Remember, you give people the light and they'll find their own way. That's the Ella Baker. But that's also the Ella Baker who was trying to organize with Arthur Kanoy and William Kunstler, these courageous lawyers, to defend the freedom fighters in the 60s. They were actually Ella was trying to form a third party when she died, the mass party, the People's Party. So when Biden has to be very careful as to who he's invoking, because she ends up coming back at him pretty tough. Absolutely. I don't know who wrote that speech for Brother Biden. I got to find out. But I just say that in terms of the fact that all of us can always grow and all of us can be challenged.
Brother West, you have time for a few more questions?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Indeed.
So Cameron Storley, another student of mine, you are on.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today and taking time for us. And in the video interview that you did with Dr. Phillips back in 2018, you mentioned how in past eras of leadership in the US, hatred and oppression and racism were all, widespread. They were just more concealed. My question for you is, now that that's kind of moved into the mainstream in US politics, what is it going to take to counteract that, in your opinion?
Well, it's a wonderful question. It's hard to know all the things required to counteract it, but certainly we have to have grand examples of people who, through courage and determination, stay in contact with the humanity of other people.
Mm.
If you lose sight of the great examples, then you no longer have any sources of inspiration. I mean, if all you're exposed to is just gangsters, there's a good chance you're going to end up highly gangsterized. You have to be exposed to great examples. That's why this class is so very important. You have to be exposed to courageous folk. You have to be exposed to loving folk. Even when they get crushed or even when they get misunderstood, you have to have a sense of what the standards are. Once you lose sight of the standards, then it's just survival of the slickest.
Survival of the slickest.
Mm-hmm. Or obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Oh, that's a whole lot of U.S. culture today. Everybody trying to get over. You just don't want to get caught. Just don't want to get caught. If you're slick and you're clever and you get over, you say, oh, now I'm successful. But there's a relation between the means and the end. How did you get over? Was there integrity in your process? That's a crucial question. And always keep in mind, the winner of every rat race is still a rat. We're looking for human beings. We're looking for human beings, and we're not just looking for smart human beings. Let the phones be smart. You be wise and courageous and compassionate. Because these days, especially here at Harvard and Princeton, where I teach, everybody want to be the smartest in the room. Because they think by being the smartest in the room, they're going to be the richest in the room. They think by being the richest in the room, they're going to be the biggest celebrity in the room. You say, oh, Lord, do you know how empty that is spiritually and morally? You can gain the whole world, control the whole world, and lose your soul, lose your ability to love, lose your ability to connect, lose your ability to be able to relate in any meaningful way. Of course, we all want we want some resources, we need money and so forth and so on. But in the end, there's got to be something deeper than that. Those persons who find out what it is and exemplify it, they ought to be the exemplars that we have. That's the crucial thing.
Thank you, Brother West. Hannah Mae.
Hi.
There you
are. Yeah. Indeed. How you doing there?
Hi. My name's Hannah Mae. I actually have a question to you that someone had tried to make an argument to me once that I didn't necessarily know if it was true or correct, but they basically were asking about in regards to like the Black community, saying that like, because earlier you were talking about how like, yes, there are a lot of like African Americans who have been in, Congress and like the president, like Obama, and who are like professional athletes and things like that, like the very high end, but there's also the very low end. And someone tried to make an argument once that they're choosing to stay in the lower end because of social dysmorphia and learned helplessness. So basically, they're becoming something that they necessarily aren't just because it's what other people expect them to be. And I just wanted to hear what your take is on if you think that that's a valid, like an excuse, or that if laziness and learned helplessness from negative situations, perceptions, and negative expectations would cause someone in a lower social class to no longer want to try to change their lives, basically.
No, I appreciate that question. Well, you all gonna have a wonderful class this semester. You got some high quality questions, each and every one of you. Well, two things to keep in mind, though, my dear sister. One is that it is true that racism or white supremacy, I'd say the same thing about sexism and male supremacy. It tries to teach people that they're less than. So that white supremacy tells Black folk like myself, you are less beautiful. You ought not love yourself. You are less intelligent. You should think lowly of yourself. You have lower moral character, so you ought to have lower expectations. And white supremacy is so deep in the making of America, because you all know about the 244 years of slavery. You know about the 78 years under the U.S. Constitution. There was slavery. It was the part of the law of America to enslave Black people, and to spread these white supremacist lies about Black people, so that if Black people begin to really believe those lies, then it's going to be very difficult for those persons who believe them to soar like eagles. Now, part of the richness of Black history is here you get my folk hated for 400 years so chronically, and yet keep dishing out all of these love warriors. We just keep on coming. Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells Barnett, here come Marcus Garvey, here come Martin King, here come Malcolm X, here come Curtis Mayfield, here come Kendrick Lamar, here come Erykah Badu, here come, you just keep, these love warriors just keep coming, giving all this hatred coming. We get traumatized, and yet keep throwing out these healers, wounded healers, not wounded haters. And then we get stigmatized. It's Black skin. It's a negative thing. And yet we keep dishing out these folk who want to embrace everybody so that no one is ever stigmatized, whoever they are. That's a great, great tradition of a grand people. So that what this person is telling you is, on the one hand, the damage done by white supremacy can make one think lowly of oneself. But the history of Black people has been one in which there's a great tradition of responding to that damage and using that damage as a springboard to actually help teach others how to love, teach others about freedom. I mean, you think, for example, of Thomas Jefferson, which is a very interesting formulation. Thomas Jefferson lays out a very rich conception of autonomy and freedom and independence. But we know he doesn't have Black people in mind at all. So Black people's conception of freedom will embrace what Thomas Jefferson is doing and take it to a place Thomas Jefferson never took it. That's why when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in August 1963, he never said, "My dream is the American dream." What did he say in that speech? "My dream is rooted in the American dream." You see, I like what Jefferson wrote on paper, but we're gonna reconstruct it in such a way that we're gonna take it to a place that Thomas Jefferson can't go, because he didn't embrace Black people. Same would be true with women. Same would be true with our gay brothers and lesbian sisters and trans. It's going to be inclusive across the board, and actually even going to be international. We're going to argue that a life in Colombia and Mexico and Ethiopia and China and Japan and Korea have the same value as a life in America. We don't have special status because we are USAers. We're human beings like everybody else. Oh, that sounds very anti-patriotic. You're anti-American, Brother West. No, I'm pro-human.
You've talked about the Roma community. You've talked about the untouchables in India.
Absolutely.
You connected
the
all.
Dalit peoples in India and the landless peasants in Brazil and the women who are mistreated in China and the Muslims in China and so forth and so on. The Jews in Russia, the Palestinians under Israeli occupation, those in Kashmir under occupation, those in Tibet under occupation. We can go on and on and on. It's a human project across the board. Now, what does that do? That gets you in trouble. That gets you in trouble. Oh, I know Brother John Lewis, what did he call it? Good trouble. Necessary trouble. But of course, John Lewis need to be criticized too. Did John Lewis speak out on behalf of everybody, Palestinians, the Wugar in China? No, he got caught as a politician too. He started with black folk, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing to start with your family, start with your mama, start with your daddy. Last thing you want to do is love everybody but your mama and daddy. Something wrong with you. If you loving everybody in the world, can't love your mama and daddy, can't love folk to come out of your own community, but you don't want to get locked into any tribalism. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what gender. It has to be universal if you're going to be Socratic and if you're going to be prophetic in that way. But and again, our musicians, they teach us. I don't know how many of y'all listen to John Coltrane's Love Supreme. But when he plays Love Supreme, he's like St. Francis of Assisi. He's even loving the birds. He's loving the animals. He's loving the dog, little Rhett and Champ and all of that. Some of y'all might have dogs, and you know how that love relation with the dog is real. Some of y'all got cats. That's a challenge for me. No, because I think cats strike me as a little bit more egoistic than dogs. And it's true. A cat will jump on your lap because it's most comfortable for them. A dog will jump on your lap because they know you like it too, and they provide some kind of comfort to you. That has a Kantian dimension to it to me. It has a little bit more morality to it, but I shouldn't come down on cats like that. You can never generalize. A lot of them kind of cats in the world. A lot of them kind of dogs in the world. But generally speaking, Love Supreme of Coltrane, every human being, every sentient creature is affirmed, is embraced. That is, for me, the highest level of morality and spirituality. And yet it is being attacked, assaulted every day by so many, nearly every regime in continents all around the world, of all colors, of all genders, and of all national identities.
Okay, brothers. Grant Lillard, you're on. Another student of mine, Brother West. Oh, and we're reading Malcolm X as well, by the way.
Is that right?
Yes, we
autobiography?
I want them to understand these two different trajectories of Dr. King and Malcolm X.
Right. Yeah. And it's the autobiography, though, brother?
Autobiography.
Ooh, good God Almighty. Yeah. Ooh, I wish I could be in your class every week.
Oh.
I tell you.
My rates are reasonable. Okay, Grant, you're on.
All right, so first off, Dr. West, I want to thank you for coming and sharing some of your wisdom with us. So my question is less philosophical and more asking for advice. So I came from a small town where unfortunately racism is still a part of the culture, especially in people that I grew up with, went through school with, that never left the town, never kind of spreading their horizons. And I still come into contact with them every now and then when I go back home. Could you give me some advice on how to battle their racism without coming off as combative? I find that a combative approach just shuts them down and they close their minds, turn to personal attacks, and it completely ruins any chance to a constructive conversation. Are there any tools that maybe you could share to help me battle their racism while at the same time maintaining an open conversation? How have you kept an open conversation throughout the years?
Ooh, wonderful question. Wonderful question. Thank you. That one thing that I think is to try to get inside of their skin and imagine what is going through their own heads and minds as to why they're putting down, let's say in this case, Black folk. Where did they get this idea of putting Black folk down? And in doing that, you begin first on a positive element. And the positive element is there's got to be some Black folk in their world or in their imagination that they think highly of. So that they're already in contact with Black humanity, they're just denying it. It could be a musician. Like, for example, when I was in Charlottesville with all of these neo-fascist gangsters, 22 different groups, Ku Klux Klan, Nazi Party, and everything. And we had just 21 of us, and they had clergy. I'm not clergy, I'm a Christian, I'm not clergy though, but you know, and they coming at us and so forth. Well, when we walked through the park, a number of these neo-Nazis were listening to Black music. And you say to yourself, this is strange. This is very strange that they hate Black people, but they know in that music there's something that's speaking to them. And you get a whole lot of white folk like that. I can't stand Black people, but I can't live without Prince. I can't stand Black people, but Beyonce moves me. Wait, what's going on here? Well, that there are instances where, and this you get this among the number of the athletes as well, where LeBron or whoever it is, Curry or whoever it is, they reach such a level of genius and excellence that it cannot be denied. So you get a lot of these racist folk who steal away and watch Muhammad Ali films because you cannot deny his genius, his achievement. But you can't stand Black people as a whole. So you start with that. And you say, oh, now what is it? What is the relation between you and whoever it is? Prince, Erykah Badu, Kendrick Lamar, whoever it is. Maybe Lil Wayne, I mean, whoever it is. What is your relation to them that is positive, but you hate their cousins? So you already have a hook that allows you to move them in such a way that you're not coming down hard on them prematurely to shut them down, but you allow them to open up even more, even if they just got a little opening. Just a little opening, broaden it out, broaden it out. In the same way, it's true with sexism as well. You know, you get the brothers and men that want to put women down and, oh, I know they're not as smart as me, but oh, what about all those women who get A+ and you got a C-? You know that they were smarter than you. Why are you holding on to these lies about male supremacy when it comes to intelligence? Well, yeah, you got a point there. I just wasn't working hard. You could have worked as hard as you wanted to. You wasn't going to be as smart as Sally and Ann in physics. So you got counter evidence to male supremacy. Male supremacy is a lie in your own experience. White supremacy is a lie in your own experience. But you live in a contradiction. You live in a contradiction. Well, the reality is that all of us, in some sense, are living a contradiction. Because you can't grow up in America and not have a little white supremacy inside of you. You can't. Black folk can't. There's white supremacy inside of Black people. Now, if there's white supremacy inside of Black folks, white supremacy inside of me, my hunch is when it comes to any vanilla brothers, so you got to have a little bit. If you grew up in America.
Thanks. That's a great approach. I never thought of it.
We all socialize into it. The films, the culture, the education, everything. So then the question becomes, well, it's not whether you have it, it's the courage to think, to love, to hope, to push it back. You learning how to die every day. Kill that white supremacy inside of you. Kill that male supremacy inside of you. kill that homophobia inside of you. We don't know of a Christian civilization that has not been anti-Jewish in terms of certain elements. We got to kill that anti-Jewish element. We don't know if a Christian civilization has been anti-Turk and anti-Arab. Kill it in order to be reborn into a more loving person, a more critically oriented person. And that's where the freedom comes in. Because that truth, in many ways, shall help you to be free, shall make you free. There's a connection between the effort, the quality, the trying, and the freeing up. Because I know, you know, Kant's great essay of what is enlightenment. I don't know if you all are doing that, that first line of what is enlightenment. It is the release, the deliverance of human beings from their self-imposed immaturity, self-incurred tutelage. Have the courage to use your reason for Mundenkeit, maturity. That's Kant himself, one of the great Enlightenment thinkers, German brother, of course, from Königsberg. And we have much to learn from Kant, no matter how critical we might be on other elements of his philosophy, you see. So that this challenge that we all have of even some of those in our own communities who are locked into narrow, short-sighted, racist, sexist, xenophobic conceptions of the world, they're still human beings like everybody else. They're still human beings like everybody else. And you push them and you want to be pushed. You know? And of course, this gets very personal in terms of our families, because I'm sure that you go to Western Colorado University, and especially when you were in person there, away from home and so on, and you come back for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and you realize, God, I love grandmama to death, but she got some Neolithic views about the world. Now, don't you ever give up on that love of grandma, but that doesn't mean you accept grandma's prejudices at all. You love her to death and say, Grandma, you're wrong as two left shoes when it comes to some of these things. But that's human. We're human. All of us are human. Never lose that human connection, even as we don't give up the effort for our radical freedom and love, our radical love and freedom.
Oh, so beautifully
Absolutely.
put. So one final question, Brother West, from Professor Heather Thiessen Riley, who got me to Western Colorado University.
Yes,
She was the director of the honors program at that time. Heather, what do you want to?
Oh, well, I teach African history here at Western, and one of my favorite books to use in the class is this one. And Intellectual Traditions of Pre-Colonial Africa.
Wow, I've got to read that, my dear sister. I've never read that one.
Constant B. Hilliard. It's a collection of primary sources. And I like using it because one of the things I see in a lot of our conversations is we pull so much from the Western intellectual tradition. And so I'm wondering what non-Western thinkers inspire you, challenge you beyond sort of our traditional Western paradigm.
That's a wonderful question. It really is. It's a wonderful question because first, you know, you would go to different religious texts. I think there's something about Buddhism that is quite serious or has had impact on me. And I talk about this with Bell Hooks, who actually is one of the great Black intellectuals who was Buddhist herself. But it's hard to think of various texts. Certain figures in Buddhism make a difference in terms of being able to seize the moment and get away from dominating and manipulative dispositions of controlling everything. That there being a certain kind of openness to the way the world is and being able to revel in the now, as it were. But see, you know, it's interesting, man, when I think of African thinkers, so many of those African thinkers are in such close conversation with the West, the Frantz Fanons and the Julius Nyerere and the Diops and others. They were great African thinkers who were educated in African universities that themselves were deeply shaped and influenced by Western philosophies and Western institutions. Now, but you're talking about pre-colonial times. I mean, good God Almighty. It goes back to Rumi and some of these earlier poets from Persia that mean much to me. Where else? Confucius, I haven't spent too much time with Confucianism, actually. You know, that's a wonderful question. I'd have to wrestle with that question a little bit more intensely. What would be your recommendations, my dear sister?
Well, I'm thinking about Nguni, for example, who wrote that wonderful book, Decolonizing the Mind, right?
Yes, Ngugi, yes, indeed.
Yeah, and so I found him to be very inspirational. And then I think your references to poetry, I think, are wonderful too, because in pre-colonial Africa, we have the great oral traditions, songs and stories. And so one of the other wonderful books is Wisdom Sits in Places, about the Apache and their connection in storytelling to the land, to the point where all you need to do is go to a place, and the philosophy of that place is embedded in the story. So if you tell that story or go to that place, you have that wonderful kind of sense of where you should be and what right action is. So those are two of my favorites.
Now see, Ngugi would be someone who, like Diop and like Fanon and others, would be connected to the West in a variety of ways. He's writing in his own indigenous language initially and decides to write in English later. But he's certainly one of the great modern minds, and he comes out of Africa. I mean, we all know, all of us go back to Africa in terms of where we actually come from as a species. That's very important, and the great African civilizations and so on that emerged therefrom. But I just think that Terence was right. You know, nothing human ought to be alien to us. I don't care what color you are, I don't care what gender you are, you ought to have an openness to a variety of different voices and traditions and heritages, but it ought to be critically filtered.
Right.
See, you don't want just an open mind and let anything go through your mind. You want an open mind with a critical filter, because every civilization has something worthy of rejection. I don't care where it comes from. And every civilization has something worthy of some affirmation.
So, Brother West, some of my
every civilization
students
has crimes.
Yes.
Western crimes, Eastern crimes, African crimes, American crimes, Canadian crimes, Latin American crimes. Who did I leave out? I got crimes across the board. But every civilization also has some contributions to make.
Rich
That's that
Stromberg,
critical filtering that we're doing. I'm sorry.
Another professor brought a book of the Hopi, Rich Stromberg.
Oh, yes. I haven't read that either. You know, it's just so hard to have an encyclopedic knowledge across civilizations and cultures. I'm so glad we've got, you know, distinguished African historians like our dear sister here, because those voices are so very important. But in the end, that interconnection, in the end, that relation, in the end, that intermingling that has to do with the ways in which all of our cultures are hybrid cultures that have learned from antecedent ones and ought to be open to subsequent ones developing. It's part of what it means to be educated.
Amen. Brother West, thank you so much for the gift of your time and your beautiful heart. I can't thank you enough. What a way to start off our semester.
Well, they're so blessed to work with you, my brother. I'm telling you, good God Almighty. But you all stay safe with all of this pandemic thing. And the important thing for me is do not in any way be paralyzed by despair or be surprised by evil. You fortify yourself. because so much coming at you all the time, but you got so much inside of you to make you resilient. And so both in class, but also, oh, who's that precious?
This is Sibylle. She hasn't met you yet. She just turned 7.
She just turned 7. How you doing, precious one?
She has Greek citizenship, and she's named after the Greek goddess of nature and healing, Sibylle.
Is that right?
Yeah, she's
How you
listening to
doing,
you.
lovely one?
Little shy.
Whoa, your father's a great man. I love him. Yes, I do. You stay strong now.
Okay, let's give you a hand. Thank you so much,
Well,
Brother
thank you all
West.
so much.
Lots
Have
of
a
love.
wonderful year.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
wonderful year.
But
brother,
bye-bye.
we're going to be in contact now.
All right. Take care. Lots of love.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thank you,
Stay
everybody.
strong. Love you, each one of you.